All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Roger Zelaya. I am the broker of record for Agents Desk Incorporated, and we have a bunch of DBAs. So today's training is gonna be around counteroffers, buyer and seller replacement home form. So these are forms that you want to fill them out differently depending on who you represent. We're going to go into the SPRP and COP from a buyer's agent perspective and seller's agent perspective. Same with the COP. So we might as well get started now. In the meantime, I am going to share a link on the chat. And that link on the chat will be so that you can see, or if you have any questions, right? These are the forms we're going to go over today. So if you click on that link, you should be able to access those forms. So let me go into these forms. I'm going to bring them over here. And let's go over the SPRP when you are representing the seller. We're going to go over that. And they are labeled. So SPRP when representing the seller, when representing the buyer, the COP when representing the buyer, and when representing the seller, right? Depending on who you represent, that's how you want your form to be filled out. Because when I get a phone call from any of the agents, my first question is, who do you represent, right? If you are in dual agency, the advice will be different. If you represent the seller, it will be different than if you only represent the buyer. So I want to make this interactive. So if you guys have any questions, just, blurt it out. There's not a lot of us today on this phone call, so we should be good. Okay, we're going to do the easy one first, which is the seller purchase of a replacement home. Actually, you know what? I don't like the way that form looks. So let me go in here and let me bring it over here. Okay. So when you are representing a seller, does everybody know what the seller purchase of replacement home car form SPRP is? And if not, just blurt it out and I can explain it to you.
Yes, I know what it is.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, Daniel. Okay, so let me get out of here real quick. Okay, so I want to show you guys basically if you are representing a seller, right? If you're representing a seller and you know that they have to buy another home in order to sell this particular home, I want to show you how it should be filled out. Now, keep in mind that everything on this form is negotiable, right? So when I'm saying you should have it this way because you're representing the seller, doesn't necessarily mean that the buyer is going to accept those terms. But we certainly want to put forward the best terms available for our seller because we're representing the seller, right? So I've filled it out as 123 Test Street, between nice buyer and amazing seller. And then this form says that the finding replacement property, right? The agreement is contingent upon the seller finding a home, and it basically says within 17 days, right? Now, or you can ask for 30 days. I want to give my seller the most amount of time. Now, is the buyer's agent going to advise their buyer to accept these terms? I don't know, but I'm certainly going to ask, right? So, so within 30 days, right? And then you always want 1A because, or B is the seller has entered into a contract. So in other words, the seller's property is already pending. So give me that information here, right? And certainly when I'm representing the seller, I want to make sure I protect my seller, and I want this particular contingency to be on here, which is close of replacement property, right? In other words, if I cannot close, the deal's off. That's essentially what this particular paragraph means. Now, remember, we're representing the seller, right? So the time periods in the agreement for inspections and any contingencies, including EMD, right? And I'm just paraphrasing. I don't have to read the entire thing unless you need me to. Then I'm representing the seller, so I want the contingency periods to remain as specified in the agreement, which the agreement would be the purchase agreement, which would be 10 days, contingency 17 days, 12 days, depending on whatever was negotiated, right? The reason why I want the buyer to start their timeline is because I want to make sure that they're moving along and that we're pushing the deal forward in order for the buyer to close, right? The buyer's deposit. Again, I filled out over here, right? Paragraph 1A, which as specified in the agreement, that's the usual 3 business days, right? So we certainly don't want to open escrow with no EMD because nothing is really moving forward. And I'm representing the seller and I want the buyer to start doing their due diligence, right? Now, this particular one was an actual SPRP that I'm copying here, and I'm reading 2C, and that's the close of escrow, right? And it says the parties agree that seller may extend the close of escrow date for the sale of seller's property for a maximum of, in this example, we have 30 days, right? Or until a date, by providing the buyer with a written notice at the same time that the seller removes the finding replacement property contingency on 1A. If we look at back at 1A, is in this example, they've accepted our 30 days. I want you to understand that I had a phone call from an agent, and basically what the listing agent said, hey, we cannot close and we need to extend the closing date by 30 days. And the buyer was ready to close, and they had a lock that was going to expire. So my first question is, well, let's find out what the contract says, because we have to follow the contract. What did your buyer agree to? And the answer was the buyer agreed to this 30 days that's on here, right? Here is where it got kind of questionable, right? The seller or the listing agent never released the contingency of finding that property, right? They had been in escrow already 1 month, okay? And the buyer's thinking we're ready to close, and we are in a position to close. And if we don't close, our lock is going to expire, which is going to cost us money. But the buyer's agent never received the finding replacement home contingency, right? Which, if I'm not mistaken, it was 17 days, like it says here, and we were already at 30 days. So what this contingency on 2C says is that when I give you the replacement home contingency removal, I can ask for a 30-day extension. And in this particular case, they had been in escrow greater than 30 days, which means now you just granted them a 60-day escrow because they had already been. Why? Because the buyer's agent never requested the finding replacement property contingency removal. Now, let's just say, and if you have any questions, please just speak up and ask, right? Because in my mind, it makes sense, but you may not have all of the context, right? But to make a long story short, the 30-day, my answer to the buyer's agent was like, look, since when did you receive the contingency removal of the finding replacement home? We have not. And I said, well, if they give it to you today, right, then you have essentially 30 additional days to close this escrow, which of course, they didn't want to do. But they had a 17-day contingency. At day 15, you should have been on the phone like, Mr. Listing Agent, how is it looking? Are you guys in escrow? Or if it would have been earlier, then certainly ask them for the removal of contingency or give them a notice to seller to perform, right? Which says the buyer's right to cancel are over here. After first giving the seller a notice to seller to perform, if seller fails to remove the finding replacement property contingency, whether they are in escrow or not, right? Then you can close this. You can cancel this transaction, right? After giving the seller a notice, the seller performing if the seller fails to give proof of replacement property as specified in paragraph 1A, right? This is how your buyer can cancel. If paragraph 1C is checked, which in this case it is checked, right? After first giving the seller notice, the seller perform. If seller fails to remove the closing and replacement property contingency, so you can ask the seller to remove that. Or D, if the seller gives the notice to buyer or either party cancellation of the agreement or replacement home. In other words, if they are in escrow and the buyer is in escrow, however, the buyer finds something wrong with the property, even though they found a replacement home, then they still have the ability to cancel. Okay. And let me see what that is. Close of escrow. Okay, perfect. Seller's right to cancel. The seller may cancel this agreement, right? It's just if the buyer hasn't removed contingencies, right? If prior to the seller's removal of the finding replacement home property contingency, seller is unable to enter into a contract to acquire property, that's how they can cancel. If paragraph 1C is checked, seller is unable to close escrow on a replacement home according to that contract, they can cancel. Now, I am representing the seller in this case. So 6C, I'm going to leave it blank, right? Because buyer's cost. If seller cancels pursuant to 6A or 6B, which is they couldn't close, seller shall return the deposit. And if checked, after delivering receipts to escrow holder, buyer shall be entitled to a buyer's reasonable out-of-pocket expenses, right? And if it is not checked off, then that's what I want for my seller. Now, let me show you guys what the SPRP would look like if I'm representing the buyer. Now, keep in mind that just because I say this is how your SPRP should look like, doesn't necessarily mean that the listing agent or the seller are going to agree to your terms, right? So if we have these side by side, let me see if I can get rid of this, hide sidebar. If we have these side by side, you notice that this is buyer sample, this is seller sample. Oh gosh, 1 second, guys. Okay, so you notice that the 30 days on here, when I'm representing the buyer, I want it to be the short amount of possible. In other words, it's like, look, Mr. Seller, I don't want you to take 17 days or even 30 days to go find a replacement home. I need you to do it in 10 days because we got to make sure that you find one. Because think about it, right? And then this always requires a phone call to the listing agent. I am in the city of Fontana, California. That's where I live. And I'll give you an example. Everybody wants to live north of the 210 freeway, which is North Fontana. But the prices in North Fontana are approximately $800,000, right? Now, if your seller says yes, and we're going to talk about Fontana because that's my local market, and the seller says, absolutely, let's get this in escrow, let's do it. They got to find a replacement home, and they say to me, look, I want to buy North Fontana, right? North of the 210, and I want a 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom home with a pool under $500,000. No matter if you have 10 days, like it says here, or if you have 30 days, it's just impossible. They're not going to find a 5-bedroom home north of the 210 with a pool for $500,000 or less. So, like, you have to have that conversation with your listing agent. The listing agent, if you're representing the buyer, right? Now, if you notice, we're putting these forms side by side. The close of escrow, I don't want as when I'm representing the seller, I want 30-day extension or 10-day or 15-day or whatever. But when I'm representing the buyer, no, dude, like, we got to get this moving, and we are not going to give you an extension when it comes to that, right? And then look, I'm representing the buyer. Sorry, I'm at 2A time periods, right? Representing the seller, we want the timelines to start now. But when I'm representing the buyer, I don't want the timelines to start now, because what if the seller finds a home and then cancels, right? Now, the only way I would agree to the time period starting as soon as possible, meaning my buyer's got to spend money on a home inspection and they got to spend money on the appraisal, more than likely, right? Is if the seller promises my buyer that they're going to pay, a certain amount, right? If they cannot find a replacement home. Because the home inspection, I made these numbers up, right? They're 1,700. Everybody has different numbers depending on the market that you work in. But the home inspection is anywhere from 450 to 550-ish, right? So call it $600. And the appraisal, I think, if it's a single family, might be about $800 to $1,000, right? That's how I came up with $1,700. In other words, look, as a buyer's agent, I don't want the timelines to start, but if you want the timelines to start, and because your seller cancels, I want you to reimburse my buyer the money that they spent, right? Whether it was, not to exceed 1,700, whether it was the home inspection, maybe in Northern California, it could be a sewer lateral. It could be the 9A report that was negotiated in LA and the buyer has to pay for it, etc. Right? So those are the two ways that you need to fill out your SPRP, and it depends on who you represent, right? That's what you're going to check off on those boxes. If you click on the link that I sent you a little bit ago, that information is, these forms are in there and you can download them. And if in doubt, guys, call me. You have my cell phone number. I'm available 7 days a week. And I always say there's not an agent out there that works, for us that is going to call me on Saturday at 3 p.m. to ask me what I'm doing if I'm at a barbecue or whatever, right? Usually an agent will call me on Saturday at 3 p.m. is because they probably have a question about a contract and you guys need answers, and I'm available to answer your questions. Okay, so that's the SPRP. That took us approximately 23 minutes. If we have a COP, which I'm going to put on here, and I'm going to pull them up next to each other, right? Let's see, this one goes over here. Any questions, guys, that I can answer? Okay. So again, if I'm representing the seller, this is what the contingency of the sale of the buyer's property. In other words, the buyer needs to sell their house to buy my listing if I'm a listing agent, right? Or if I'm a buyer's agent, my buyer, which is also the seller, needs to sell their house in order to buy the new one, right? And again, you're going to fill it out completely different depending on who you represent. In this case, we're representing the seller. In this case, on the right, we're representing the buyer. Let's see. Okay. And you notice that some of the check marks on the seller are here, right? And I want the buyer to only enter into a contract for the sale of the buyer's property, meaning that if you enter into escrow, we're moving forward to close. Well, that's if I represent the seller, because I want to make sure that everything moves along. But if I'm representing the buyer, I don't want that. I want 1A, which is the buyer entering into a contract for the sale of and closing escrow on the buyer's property, right? That protects the buyer. Depending on who you represent, you want to protect the buyer or you want to protect the seller. And that's why 1B is checked off when I'm representing the seller, because I only want them to enter into a contract, right? Number 2, the buyer entering into a contract 17 days, or in this case, the quicker, the better, right? So I want them to go find a property, again, pick up the phone. What are your what are they looking for? Again, if they're looking for North Fontana, 5 bedrooms, 3,000 square feet, under 500,000, they're never going to find that. So it will never work. But the buyer, in this case, I want the shortest amount of time, which is 10 days. You notice when I'm representing the buyer, I want the longest amount of time, which I put at 25 days, right? And then the listing agent, 3, buyer has signed a listing agreement. As a listing agent, and it has happened to me, I will not take a contingency of buyer's property if it's not even listed? Again, you got to pick up the phone, talk to that agent and say, well, what do you got, right? And you got to do your due diligence because, again, same example, now they're selling the house and they're North Fontana, 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms with a pool, which we said it's probably north of 800,000. And now they're asking $1.1 million. Well, you know that they ain't going to get $1.1 million because you're probably going to run the comps, and you got to make sure that everybody is on the same page because they can ask $1.1 million. They're never going to get it, which means you're never going to close your deal. So personally, I would advise my seller not to accept an offer when the property is not even listed, right? And even if it is listed, you got to look at it, right? I know this market well, so I'm going to look at it and say, like, look, 5 bedrooms, 4 bath with a pool in Fontana, north of the 210 for 1.1 will never fly, maybe 850. So you're completely out of the market. You're not going to get you're not going to get any offers, right? So again, if I'm representing the buyer, I want it to be right listed as soon as possible, and it's listed with this person. And we want to make sure that we're going to, continue to move the needle forward. Close of escrow, right? I'm representing the seller on the left, and I'm going to leave this blank, which basically says if 1A or 1C applies, buyer has until the following time to close escrow on the sale of the buyer's property, the scheduled close of escrow, which is what I want, or no later than 5 days. But I didn't check it because I want them to, I want to keep the file moving forward, right? Whereas if you are representing the buyer over here, close of escrow, which is number 4, so you can also leave it blank, right? Number 5, I put in representing the seller. I left it within 2 days, but I'm representing the buyer. I want to give myself 7 days. Now, just because you put 7 days on there does not mean they're going to accept it, right? Everything's negotiable. The listing, if you as the buyer's agent are giving this to a listing agent and the listing agent is savvy enough to understand all of this, it'll be like, nah, bro, like 7 days ain't going to work. Like 2 days is going to work, right? So you're always going to have to negotiate. This one over here, number 7, is very, very, very important, okay? So this is when a seller, you're representing a seller and they get a backup offer, and I want to have immediate right to notify the buyer anytime after acceptance. So if I am in escrow, okay, this may be confusing. If I'm in escrow, let's call it 500,000. I'm in escrow and I accept your buyer's offer, okay? And then I get an offer all cash at 505 for the sake of argument. I can immediately notify the buyer anytime after acceptance, hey, you got to close or I'm going to take this other offer at 505, which is $5,000 more than what you're offering me. Plus it's a cash deal, so I don't have to wait for the loan, and they're ready to close in 12 days, whatever, right? Now, if I'm representing the buyer, I don't care what you have. I don't want to give you the right to notify the buyer that the seller shall not have the right to invoke the provisions in paragraph 7B, which is like the removal of contingencies, right? On the left, we have the listing agent, representing it from a seller's perspective. On the buyer's perspective is completely different. So I don't want the seller to come and give me a notice and say, like, look, I got a better offer, so I got to kick you out. No, got to protect your buyer on the right-hand side, got to protect your seller on the left-hand side. Now, again, doesn't mean that when I submit I'm representing the buyer and I submit this COP to the listing agent on the right-hand side, they'll be like, yeah, sure, no problem, unless they may not be experienced, right? But everything really matters. So, and then look at number 11, which is the time for performance of contract obligations and delivery of buyer's deposit, right? As the buyer's agent, I want on the day after buyer delivers to seller any of the following: escrow evidence, right? Buyer's election in writing signed by the buyer to begin time periods. I want this box checked off. As a listing agent, I don't want that box checked off because I want the timelines to start now. We are at 10:31. Do you guys have any questions that I can answer based on this information so far, or any other information for that matter? Daniel says no. How about nobody else? Let's see. All right, amazing. Christine Daniels, hello. You have a question.
Sorry, that was an accident. I was trying to do a thumbs down also.
Oh, okay, cool. Amazing. All right, so let me get rid of this. Okay, now let's talk about Daniel, no worries. Daniel, you need to go at the time that I go to the gym, man. 6:30. Just kidding. Doesn't matter. All right, let me go to documents here and let's see. Okay, we're going to talk about, where's my seller multiple? There we go. Okay, we'll talk about seller multiple counteroffer, okay? And we're going to go over it at a high level. However, one thing that I want to tell you is there's a lot of confusion on the timelines, right? So we're going to go over it real quick. We're just going to date it today. We're going to date it today. And then the offer that we received was on Monday. And this is going to be from a nice buyer. So on here, now this liquidated damages and arbitration disputes is you only use this form if on the offer that you received, because now we're listing agents, right? On the offer that you received, the liquidated damages was not initialed by the buyer. Now, what we used to do before is we would go on here and say, you know, paragraph, I don't know, 28. I'm just making it up. Liquidated. I don't know how to spell. Damages to be part of this agreement, and buyer and seller to sign, right? Now, that's what we usually used to do. And then you'd go back and alter the original purchase agreement. But today, you don't have to do that. You could just ignore all of that and then click on liquidated damages arbitration agreement, which will probably automatically add it for you here. And this is where liquidated damages are on. And now everybody's got to initial it. And then they got to agree to arbitration of disputes, right? Now, why liquidated damages? Because that limits the amount of money that the seller can go after the buyer, right? And if we read it here real quick, right? If buyer, let's just talk about $1 million purchase price, and we're going to say $10,000 deposit, which is 1%, right? And the liquidated damages says the following: and if the buyer fails to complete this purchase because of buyer's default, seller shall retain as liquidated damages, assuming that you've already removed all contingencies, right, the deposit actually paid. If the property is a dwelling with no more than 4 units, one of which the buyer intends to occupy, so 1 through 4 units, the same thing applies, then the amount retained shall be no more than 3% of the purchase price. Any excess shall be returned to the buyer. Release of funds will require mutual signed release instructions from both buyer and seller, or judicial decision or arbitration award. So let's talk about this real quick. $1 million. So the actual deposit is 10,000, right? Which means that the seller can only keep the 10,000. They cannot keep 3%. Okay. And then the difference between the other thing is the arbitration disputes. there's mediation and arbitration. Mediation is usually a retired real estate broker like myself, and and I volunteer my time and I go listen to the dispute and, come up with an answer. For example, right? The seller didn't disclose that there was a leak in the roof. And then we're going to listen to all of the evidence, and we're going to say, yeah, you didn't disclose it. They spent $10,000 to fix it. You owe him $10,000. But if the other party disagrees with that, because they might be looking for $20,000, then they have to leave mediation and then go to arbitration. So it's always mediation, meaning retired real estate agents / brokers that are going to make the decision. But if you disagree with that decision, you go to arbitration. And arbitration is usually a retired judge. Okay. So that's the big difference on these two. Now on, this is the seller multiple. I want to tell you guys that if you are making a seller multiple counter offer, right, you don't have to give the same terms of the seller multiple to, let's say you have 3 offers, right? You don't have to give the same terms to the 3 offers. Now, one offer may be the strongest, and I'm just going to make up some terms, right? So we'll say that, offer number, not offer number 1, but one of the things is, contingency. I'll just put contingency to be 12 days. All right. Okay, and then 2 EMD to be 50,000, and then 3 might be that's I'll just put all contingencies, right? AL. Now, so I'm just going to leave that here, right? So we'll say that, look, the offer that I'm countering, I want all contingencies to be 12 days, and I want the EMD to be $50,000. But let's say that I already have another offer, right? And that contingency period is 10 days, and the deposit is, $10,000 as an example, right? So I could write another offer because a seller multiple and say, like, you're offering me 10 days or whatever. I need you to go for 8 days. And I don't want to be so aggressive on the EMD because they already put, I forgot what I said, but let's say 20,000. Now I may want to say, look, give me $25,000 EMD and you got yourself a deal, because I may give harsher terms to the offer that I may not want versus a little bit easier terms on the offer I may want, because it seems like they are able to perform a little bit quicker, better, right? And again, I always pick up the phone and say, hey, do you think your guy can do this? Do you think they can do that, right? Personally speaking, I'm not a big believer in backup addendums, because 99% of the time, the backup addendum or the backup offer never goes through, right? I've been in this industry since 1991. And I have done several backup offer addendums. And in my 30 plus years of working in real estate, one time I actually got a phone call from an REO agent and said, hey, it wasn't even a backup offer. Said, you submitted an offer. The guy that we accepted bailed. Do you think your buyer still wants it? That was 2008-ish in Rancho Cucamonga. Property that is today worth $1.1 million. It was like 250 or so, right? So, but usually the vast majority of them don't really work, right? The other thing that I do is, remember, you're doing a multiple. So this guy that has $25,000, I may give them, a quick timeline. Like I need you guys to make a decision quick because I want your offer. So I always put in a timeline. It could be 5 p.m. By tomorrow, right? Whereas the other people, you may not want to do that too. Okay, this is the selection of accepted multiple counter offer, and this, guys, is important because it's always about timelines, right? if you give them until 8/6, which is tomorrow, and the offer comes in on Friday at 9 a.m., well, now you don't have to create an addendum, and your seller would then accept on the late acceptance. Okay, let's any questions on this? I know it's kind of a high level and quick overview, but we have the buyer's counteroffer and a couple other forms that I want to go over. Okay, man, you guys are easy. I love it.
I actually do have a question.
Go for it, Ruby.
So regarding the seller counteroffer, I came across an escrow where they had requested that the contingencies be passively removed, like no written contingency removal. Are they allowed to do that?
Nope, 100% not, because you used to be able to do that before contingencies were a thing. I'm talking like 20 years ago, right? And they would write on there like, on the 15th day, contingency is to be removed. Now I can show you why it's not allowed, right? Let me look at the RPA residential listing. Here we go. Oh. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Okay, so it says removal of contingency, right? This is paragraph 8, letter J, removal contingencies, right? It says for the contingencies for review of seller documents, prelim, condo disclosures, buyer shall within the time specified in 3L, which is 17 days, 10 days, whatever, right? Or 5 days after delivery of the seller documents or disclosures, whichever occurs later, remove the applicable contingency in writing. So just because they want to make it a passive, no, we're agreeing to 8J. So it has to be in writing. No other way. Let's see. Let me see if I can find it somewhere else. Seller shall in writing provide documents in writing. Let's see. Condition of title. But yeah, it's go back one. Continuation, buyer retains the right in writing to either remove the remaining contingencies, cancel this agreement once the buyer's removed. Okay. Seller right to cancel must be done in writing. So anyway, but yeah, it's on the purchase agreement. It must be in writing. And I would never allow my buyer, right, to do that. And remember this, like if the listing agent is asking for it to be passive, don't agree to it, because like, what if my buyer that I'm representing needs some additional time? The answer is no. And we are agreeing to the contract. And why are you altering the contract, Mr. Listing Agent, right? I don't like it when people make addendums, because I always say there's probably a form for that, right? Let me give you an example. I got a phone call this week. Hey, I represent the buyer, and the seller is allowing the buyer to move into the property before we close, and we're going to close in 1 month. So I created an addendum, and he read the addendum to me, and I said, listen, man, like that could be interpreted a whole bunch of different ways, because you're not writing this addendum in legalese, right? You're not an attorney. So I go, but there is a form for that, right? And that form is called early possession. And so, again, right, I don't like it when people create addendums. Somebody else also, that's why this is on here. Somebody else created from ChatGPT, okay? They created a cash for keys addendum. And I'm like, dude, no, do not use that. You're leaving yourself so open that there is a cash for keys car form. Okay. So when in doubt, when you're trying to do an addendum, call me and I'll probably guide you the right direction. And the cash for keys, is for a buyer early. I'm sorry, no, this is the cash for keys. The early occupancy is a different document. Let's see. Yeah, buyer early occupancy addendum, right? Is it on here? Where is it? Oh, I gotta move it up. It's right here. And he did a pretty good job. But I'm like, look, there's a reason why we pay a lot of money to the MLS and California Association of Realtors for them to make these addendums for us, right? Okay, let's so now well, if you didn't know, like you can give on a seller multiple counter better terms to somebody versus somebody else because you like that offer better, and you're not you, but your seller likes that offer better and is leaning towards that offer. Okay. Okay, buyer counter offer, pretty straightforward. And I want to get to another form after this. Buyer counter offer, right? We want liquidated damages, or we had done that on here. And we want the expiration. Wait, no, this is a seller multiple. Buyer counter offer. Liquidated, if we wanted liquidated damages to be done, right? Is it going to be 1 or 2? And what are your terms? And personally, I always like to give, I don't want to wait 3 days, right? Like, look, give me an answer for my buyer so we can move forward, or I got to go show them other property, right? So, and you can get a seller multiple and give back a buyer counter offer. There's no buyer multiple counter offer, right? And then let me show you this other form. Actually, I'm going to ask you guys this. This is not a trick question. Actually, it kind of is. But how many of you believe that as a listing agent, you cannot tell anybody if you have offers and for how much and what were the terms? How many of you guys believe that you can, that is super top secret? Daniel. Okay. I know, Daniel, you're at the gym. Okay. So I'm going to use you, Ruby. So you are the listing agent, and I call you and say, hey, I'm calling about 123 Main Street. Can you tell me how many offers do you have and how much and what are the terms? What are you going to say, Ruby?
I wouldn't be too specific, but I would give them a range.
Okay. That's a good strategy, right? Now, what if, what about, what do you, okay, so that's pretty good, right? Now I want to show you guys this particular form. It's called the PRBS, right? Let's see, the PRBS, it's right here. Hold on 1 second. Multiple sellers, broker. Okay, let me see. Confidential. Oops. Okay, let me remove these forms. Okay. So broker dual agency. Let me just read this real quick. They have changed it. Give me 1 sec. They changed this form on me. Okay. All right, but here goes, right? It says dual agency. In the event of dual agency, seller agrees that the dual agent may not, without the express permission of the respective party, disclose to the other party confidential information, included but not limited to facts relating to either the buyer's or seller's financial position, motivations, bargaining position, or any other personal information that may impact the price, including the seller's willingness to accept a price less than the listing price or the buyer's willingness to pay a greater price if you have a dual agency, right? They have moved some stuff on me here. So possible. Let me see if what this one says. Broker. Okay, here it is. So this is the PRBSB for buyers, right? But look at this. Acknowledgement and consent offers are not necessarily confidential. Buyer is advised that the seller or listing agent may disclose the existing of terms or conditions of a buyer's offer to other interested parties and agents unless all parties and their agent have signed a written confidentiality agreement, CAR form NDA. In the absence of a signed NDA, buyer consents to such disclosure. Whether any such information is actually disclosed depends on many factors, such as current market conditions, the prevailing practice in the real estate community, the listing agent's marketing strategy, and instructions of the seller. Now, let me explain what this means, right? Most of us that are representing buyers don't know that if I'm the listing agent, right, I can say, yeah, asking price is $1 million. I got three offers on the table. One's for $890, one's for $995, and one's for $1,005,000, right? That's what I will disclose. Doesn't mean that it's right or wrong, but this form allows me to disclose that. Now, if I say the asking price is $1 million and I have 3 offers and I have an offer at $1,005,000, and let's say Ruby calls me and I tell her that, what are you going to do with what is your buyer going to do if they really want the property? Ruby?
Yeah, they're going to offer more.
They're going to offer more. So guess what I did for my seller? Got him more money,
Increase.
right? Yeah. Increase it, right? So now if the listing agent says, can't tell you, it's top secret, send me your highest and best offer. Well, in my opinion, if he would have told me, like, I have an offer for $1,005,000 and my buyer really wants it, my buyers might come in at $1,010,000 and he just made his seller an additional $5,000, right? But because back in the day, that was not allowed. It has since changed, right? Now, in my career, 30 plus years, I've only had one non-disclosure agreement. It was a property in Beverly Hills. The agent called me, says, I've never heard of this NDA. They want my seller to sign it. And we never did find out if, more than likely, that was a savvy buyer's agent, number one, because it was a hot property, or number two, it could have been like a celebrity trying to buy that property, right? And that celebrity may not, like, I don't want them to know who I am and whatever. It was a corporation that was purchasing the property, but they wanted us, before I send you the offer, your seller needs to agree to the non-disclosure agreement, because I don't want him saying anything to anybody, meaning like, yes, I have 3 offers and here are the numbers, so that we miss out, right? So that is an option that you have. Typically, I've never seen it except one time in a long time. Do you guys have any other questions that I can answer, whether they're on topic or off topic?
Sorry if I sound a little muffled. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you, Daniel.
So this agreement that you're going over right now is basically forfeiting the right for the seller to disclose my buyer's offer, right?
That would be this particular form, the NDA.
Gotcha.
I'm reading. And this is, sorry, Daniel, this is the possible representation of more than one buyer in a dual agency transaction, car form PRBS-B. Go ahead.
Gotcha. So in a way, you're saying the seller could disclose the offers in place numbers.
Right. Remember when we talk about, you are correct. The seller could, right? Now, the seller could, which is really you because you're their agent. You have agency with them, right? So in my opinion, right? And everybody can run their business differently, right? I 100% of the time when I am a listing agent, I will say, Daniel, nice talking to you. Yes, I do have offers. I have 3. Asking price is 800, right? I got one at 750. I got a cash one for 350 that we can close in 3 days. And I got one for 795, right? Whatever. What are you going to do with that information as a buyer's agent? Like, hey, Mr. Buyer, they got one at 795, asking is 850. Well, what do you want to come in at, right? Like,
Yeah.
I will, what I have just done is pushed up the price for my seller. Now,
right.
I'm not sure if the listing agreement has it anymore because they keep changing the forms on us, but that's my strategy, right? And I tell the seller, unless you don't want me to say that, then I don't have to. But typically speaking, let me ask you, if you're a buyer, blah, 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 what would you do? So I'd offer more. I said, exactly. And that's how I will do a better job for you than anybody else, because that's my marketing strategy, Mr. Seller.
I feel like I've been getting a lot of like listing agents when I'm representing a buyer telling me, like, I've got a multiple agents tell me, oh, we can't disclose the numbers. So what do they mean by that?
Yeah, that means that, okay, so that means that they are not going to tell you what I say. In my opinion, right, that strategy is not good because, okay, so the my highest and best offer, because they could tell you like, look, Daniel, send me your highest and best offer. Asking price is 800, right? And I have an offer at 750 as an example, right? And you'd be like, okay, well, my highest and best offer is 720. So, but if he would have told you I got one at 750, then you go back to your buyer and be like, look, they got an offer at 750. If you really want this thing, you got to go up. So
yeah, and then what if that 750 offer falls apart? Now you have an offer only at 720 with the highest best. If you're the listing agent, it could just slip up. Yeah.
And in my opinion, right, doesn't mean I'm right. In my opinion, I think that's that strategy does not benefit the seller, right? But people still have this thing from the REO days where the contract has then changed many, many times since, that it's top secret, not gonna tell you, send me your highest and best offer. Well, highest and best offer is 500,000. Like, what do you think about that? You're asking is 800. Like, let's not waste any time, right? And for me, as a listing agent, that strategy, not the one I mentioned, but the strategy of telling you how many offers I have and for how much, has worked 100% of the time. They will always come back higher than my highest offer that I have, always. And if the terms are not the same, then that's when you have a seller multiple, right? So let me
Correct.
RLA. Let me see if oh, that's not what I meant to do. Get out of here, go back. Let me stop the recording, guys, and then we can how do you stop the recording? Right here, I think. Oh, stop recording.